Let's Get Tryin is a podcast that challenges us to live real and authentic lives, no matter the journey we're on, from life to faith to even mental health. Host Erin Lee presents the importance of never giving up. So let's get Tryin with Erin Lee.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Let's Get Tryin. So glad that you're here. If you're new to the podcast, Let's Get Tryin is a podcast about living real, being authentic, no matter where you're at in life, no matter the journey that you're on, especially when it feels like, hey man, I've messed up today and I don't want to keep going. No, what we got to do is never give up. Keep trying, keep going, keep moving. That's what the Lord wants from us. And the good and hopeful thing that we have is that Jesus is right beside of us. He's helping us walk through these times. And so why we do this podcast is to encourage you, to challenge you, to lead you toward that very thing, and be reminded that you're not alone in this world. I know that's a lot of stuff, but it all goes together when we live real and we be authentic and we recognize that we're not alone. So yeah, that's what this podcast is about. Hey, on today's episode, I'm incredibly excited to have my good friend Katelyn Tabb back. She was on here about a year ago, and in this episode, she's sharing how we're all fighting. We're all having things that we're dealing with. And you know what? Sometimes we don't know where it's coming from, whether it's anxiety and depression. We don't know where this is coming from, but we all have a fight. But she's also talking about how the Lord has been teaching her new things in this season and this past year. And so it's a great episode. I'm excited to share my conversation with her. Also, before we hit to that conversation, please hit the subscribe button. Please share this with your friends and family. Please tell the guy that you are standing in line behind at the grocery store, because he needs to hear about this too. But yeah, I just need your help. Word of mouth promotion would really help me out. I believe that that's the best form of getting it out there. And again, as always, this is not about a podcast. It's about challenging and encouraging people to live a life where they're not held down by feeling like they're alone, not held down by feeling like they have to hide who they are, and also not held down by feeling like the world is against them. And honestly, we all live in our heads, and I believe that it's important to get this stuff out, know that we're not alone. And man, you can help people do that by sharing this. And all right, I think I've said everything on the list. Yep, I did. Okay. All right, let's jump to my conversation with Katelyn Tabb. So what's up, everybody? I have my friend Katelyn Tabb with me on this episode of the podcast. She is revisiting us. She was with us back in June, and I interviewed her there and was really blessed by you, Katelyn, and the fact that you jumped in on the podcast and you're doing that now. And we are good friends. Our families are good friends, and we get to see each other on a regular basis. So we talk about life and struggles and anxiety and depression on a regular basis. But I thought it would be good to bring you back on and just talk about maybe just kind of come back around now almost a year later, how things have been since that last episode. So Katelyn, tell us, how have you been since the last episode?
Yeah. So I was actually surprised that it was June of last year that we did this, because I remember going into the last time we talked thinking like, okay, like I was in a really good spot when the rest of the world was everything was falling down around us. And I was thinking, I'm feeling really great. Like I'm not really struggling with these day-to-day battles of anxiety and depression. And then things changed. Apparently our podcast jinxed me. No, but
so sorry.
Yeah, so sorry. Man, in July, I just had, and I don't even really know exactly what kind of caused it. I have a couple things in my head that I felt like triggered what was starting it, but I had a major setback, like what I would consider my worst. Kelby, my husband and I, Kelby, I feel like we disagree on what, like every time I'm in it, I'm like, this is the worst I've ever been. Like, this is the hardest it's ever been for me. And he's like, oh, I don't know. But it was a really dark place that, started with anxiety and just these racing thoughts. And then turned into like a real depression where I just didn't want to get out of bed. I was struggling really, really bad. So, and that usually like the way I guess anxiety works with me or depression or the combination of both is I kind of feel something coming on. Like I'm a very upbeat, outgoing person. And then all of a sudden it's like I feel this fog come in, is kind of how I explain it. And then suddenly it disrupts everything in my life, my thinking, my attention, which is already limited. My thoughts, like the things that I think about myself and everything. So when I felt that coming on, I was like, okay, I kind of braced myself. I'm very open about talking to Kelby about it or reaching out to friends, but usually it lasts a couple weeks and it kind of fades out. And this was months of, I mean, it was really, really bad for a couple weeks, but then, I mean, it took months and it's never been like that for me to get to where I felt like the cloud or the fog had kind of lifted for me. And really, I'm still just processing and trudging through it all and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So I think you've mentioned to me, like, there's not been anything that you could like pinpoint that has triggered it so much, right?
No, no. I wish, like I'm constantly thinking about it, talking about it with Kelby, with my counselor. But it's hard for me to know. I think everyone's automatic answer over the past year is like, well, we've been like shut inside and,
Huh.
the world's been falling apart. And I'm like, well, I didn't really feel like it was lack of interaction with other people. I don't know. I think a lot for me stems back to my perfectionistic tendencies. And I like one thing will kind of trigger and then it just like takes over. But I struggle with those thoughts a lot. So, what separates one that just comes in and goes out the other ear versus one that sets up camp and just ruins everything about my day to day?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah. I think that's an important piece with all this. I've struggled for years to feel like, oh, I got to figure out what it is that's triggering me, which there are things.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. There are things that trigger me. And a lot of it's built in my own insecurities that cause me to get to that place. But I also find myself like, sometimes I just wake up that way. I just wake up miserable. I wake up
Mm.
overwhelmed and burdened by things. And it usually has not been because of anything, but I think there's something mental that's going on there that just kind of
Yeah.
triggers it. All right. So in your own words, how would you sum up 2020 in a sentence? What would you say?
Such a tough question. I know reading over that question, I was like, oh man, puts a lot of pressure. I have to come up with a perfect sentence. Um,
Exactly. It better be
and
grammatically correct. So,
I don't know about that. So, really, for me, I think thinking back about just the journey that I've been on in the past year, mine was thinking, or I guess the sentence that I came up with was learning to let go and trust God's plan. Because ultimately, it didn't go how I planned. If
right.
I got to pick, I would be happy. I would wake up with energy. I would be joyful. I would be patient with my children. And pretty much the opposite happened. So I think I kind of just had to come to the point where I didn't have control over anything. Like I wanted to feel better.
Mm,
I wanted to feel functional as a wife, as a mom, at my job, and I didn't. And so ultimately I had to keep kind of trudging on and knowing God is in control. It's not fun to think like, oh, this struggle is part of God's plan. Because I think some people can take that and be like, oh, he's punishing me or whatever. But
mm.
I've had moments where I've been able to see the silver lining of my struggles. So I think, yeah, this past year really has been kind of what I reference a lot. I'll say that I'm kind of in cruise control mode where I'm like, listen, got to feed. We have to feed our kids. We have to show up at work. We have to, make meals. We have to do all these things. And so I just kind of push through and know I just have to take a deep breath and know that God has a plan for me. And no matter anxiety, depression, my lack of patience, none of that is going to change his plan. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people would probably describe 2020 in multiple ways. So for me, it wasn't as bad during the quarantine time, but like after the fact, I don't know if it was like I white knuckled my way through 2020, most of 2020. And then when it felt like things were supposed to get back to normal, they didn't. And then like, it just felt like I ran out of energy or ran out of breath or whatever you want to call it. And then I realized how much of a dumpster fire 2020 was. Okay. So here's what I want to do for us, for the next few minutes. I'd like for us to kind of look at the spectrum of maybe the good and the bad of, how things have been going for you. And so look at it in the context of, what are some of the struggles? What are some of the strengths you feel like you've had? But let's focus on that first one. What do you think has been, your biggest struggle in all of this for the past year?
Man, I think for me personally, in my just day to day, is the fluctuations of my emotions. Kind of like how you said, sometimes you just wake up, and that's why I struggle to think like this is completely, like I have to remind myself this is out of my control. Like sometimes I will wake up at 2 a.m. and my thoughts will be racing. And other times I can I can wake up at 6:15, fall back asleep. I can wake up that, like I can, and sometimes when I wake up and I am so anxious and so confused, like that's where I struggle with, is kind of the cognitive aspect of how it affects me.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't make a plan for the day. I can't, like Kobe and I laugh. Like sometimes I'll just stand in front of my clothes or the refrigerator. I'm like, well, I gotta feed my kids. Like, what am I gonna get out? Or like, well, I guess I can't wear a robe to work today. Luckily, I wear scrubs to work, so I don't have to decide, like going to church or doing something. I'm like, well, I guess and I kid you not, like it is debilitating. Like I can stress over the silliest things. And so then sometimes I wake up and I'm like, okay, orange juice, waffles, put on some jeans, put on a pink shirt. All right, let's go. And Kelby's like, well, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know, but it's good. Like, life's good. And I'm like, oh. And there's like the fluctuation and like, I have no control over that, and I think it's hard, especially, I read a lot of I guess they're considered self-help books, but like books that talk about anxiety and depression or just, how your thought patterns work. And there's a lot, you kind of have two ways to look at it, or I guess two different situations. One is there's a chemical imbalance in my head and it is affecting me. And then there's also, okay, you have to pull in those negative thoughts, push them out and say like, no, this isn't, and fight it with truth. And I think I want someone to tell me like, okay, are you just not catching your negative thoughts? That's something I work on in counseling, catching my negative thoughts and not doing like all or nothing statements to where I'm like, well, I'm never going to do this. I always mess up, and realizing how I'm talking to myself. So when I listen to like a book or a podcast or something to where they might be saying like, you just, you got to get those thoughts out of your head. I'm like, well, listen, like sometimes I can stop myself and say, Katelyn, you are not the worst mom in the world. Like that is Satan feeding you these lies. And other times I can't, like, I genuinely, that's another thing, my counselor tells me I'm not supposed to say I can't, but I genuinely feel like I can't in the moment. And so it's hard for me because I don't know, there's not a black and white answer. Like, okay, you just need to get out of your head in this sense. Or, it's out of your control kind of, I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does.
yeah.
That's really good. And just side note, I want to ask you this. You've mentioned several times now that you're going to counseling.
Yes.
I know actually that there's many people who may be even listening to this episode and are like, yeah, that's not for me. I'm not going to do that. I was one of those people for a long time before I gave in and finally went. Uh, what value do you see in counseling, and how would you encourage someone who maybe is feeling like, nah, I can't do that?
Yeah. Um, it's tough because I feel like I've kind of ripped off that band-aid to be like, okay, like once you go and you realize it's like, okay, it's not this big, ugly, scary like thing or like a death sentence, like, oh, I gotta go to counseling now. So
Right.
like my life is over. Um, for me, you know, I think there's value in having somebody who isn't, directly in my life for me to come to and say, this is what I am struggling with. I could go to my husband or like my close friend, but everybody, like those types of people would have some type of bias opinion, I guess. But going to someone who can kind of give me an unbiased opinion, give me, I see the lady that I see is a Christian counselor, and she can speak truth into me that is important to me, not just like you're doing a good job. Like she gives me scripture, she gives me encouragement, biblical encouragement to remind me that, like I said, God is in control. And I think going back to kind of when I first started with this lady, which was several years ago, I drug my feet for like the longest time, but I went and I remember the freeing feeling. It was before Kelby and I were even married. I was moving from Louisville to E-Town. I was completely changing like my age. Like I went from working in a nursing home as a speech therapist to working with pediatrics. I was planning a wedding. We bought a house, like all these things that were going on. And she just kind of stopped and looked at me and was like, yeah, like, look at these things. Like, let me show you this list of like the 20 top most stressful things that can affect your life. And let's just check off how many you're like doing right now. And I think because she wasn't like my husband or my mom or somebody that I knew had to love me and speak nice things to me, I think just having her look at me and saying, this is a lot. Like, it's okay that you're feeling like this. Like it seems so simple kind of saying it, but it was a game changer. Like that was probably 2013. And I still remember sitting in her chair and her telling me that and me just being like, okay, like, all right. Like I'm not totally crazy here. Like there's a lot going on. So I don't know. I think you have to kind of push yourself past the point to where you realize I have to get something to help me, because there's no way that struggling with anxiety, depression, or both, you can't stay afloat just doing it yourself, like even if you have a great support system. Kelby, my husband, like he needs respite from counseling me too. Like I can't just do my counseling sessions like at bed when he's trying to fall asleep. I'm like, well, let me just blurt all this out on you. She is able to give me, clinical perspective, and that's helpful to me.
Oh no, that's great. That's great. I just, as someone that fought it, like you said, drug my feet, I really believe that there's so much value in it. And honestly, I feel like probably a lot of people think that unless you're at your worst case scenario, I think most people think counseling, they think, oh man, like you got to be at the end of your marriage, or you got to be, you got to be like suicidal to actually go like talk to somebody about this. And I would say even in the good seasons, you should probably continue that, because there's so much value. And then something else you said I thought was really great is having someone that's not directly involved in your life on a regular basis, having someone that is unbiased to all the emotional things that you're connected to is huge in helping you process, because they're not going to have, well, I have this connection to your mother-in-law, and there's a whole deal there. It's that kind of thing. But yeah, I see a ton of value in that. Well, just continuing that kind of digging into your own self. How have you seen your spiritual walk being affected, good or bad, by the depression and anxiety stuff?
I think ultimately, this would be on the good side of it.
Yeah.
Is that I am grateful for my faith and my church family, like my community that I have around me, because ultimately that's reminding me of the purpose in all of this. I think about people in my life that might not have that type of foundation, really. And it's like, well, shoot, like if we're just here stuck on this earth for like, I don't know, like 80 or 90 years, depending on how healthy you eat, like, I just don't know. Like, if that's it, like, oh, like I could see where this battle wouldn't be worth it. It would just really, like, that debilitating aspect of it would kind of take over. So I think I'm grateful for my faith, because I have a way to view all of this as a purpose. I have a community, and not to say that if you don't have faith, you can't have a community that supports you, but
Right.
I have a community that also reminds me of this, of the purpose that God has for me. And so, yeah, I think with the anxiety and depression, it has allowed me, once I got to that point, to be comfortable being vulnerable and saying, like, hey, like, this isn't easy. I am struggling, like, stepping over that line of whether it's being vulnerable enough to say, I need help, I'm going to go see a counselor, or look at someone and say, man, I'm just sad. Like, and I've been sad, and I am anxious, and I know I'm not supposed to be anxious, but I am.
Yeah.
That type of, that vulnerability with friends, with God. I don't know how to explain it. And I don't know if it's just me because I'm an outgoing person, but like once I kind of, like I said, ripped that Band-Aid off, it was like freeing. Like no longer did it hold this power over me to where just in my head, I'm like, oh, could I be like struggling with anxiety or depression? It's like, okay, I am. Like, let's move past this.
Sure.
And let's try to thrive even with this like big, heavy backpack on me. The bad parts of it, there's a lot. I feel like how it has affected my spiritual walk, mainly my thoughts. I'm very negative with myself. I like to put these perfectionistic expectations, I guess, on myself. And so I'm constantly telling myself, you're not like a good enough Christian. You're not nice enough. You're not patient enough. You are judgmental. And so those, like with anxiety and depression in the equation, they just multiply. And so I think that kind of makes my thoughts spiral in a way. And that is not glorifying to my spiritual walk at all. Sure. I think the way I feel debilitated in these moments kind of steals my motivation. And, it is important to me in my faith to stay connected with God through prayer, through reading. And I have found that I'm not a super disciplined person. So then when you add lack of motivation and frustration, that makes me struggle, because I tend to kind of wallow in those thoughts of like, well, so-and-so probably is reading better. She's praying better, more for what, and so I think that kind of having the anxiety and the depression in my head affects, I guess, just my confidence with my relationship with God. I tend to think poorly of my character and everything like that. So that's the bad parts.
No, and here I want to take a second to encourage you because you are, yes, you are your own worst critic, and those thoughts come swirling in your head. And one of the things I've learned to realize is that I need to count the number of times I'm talking to myself throughout the day because, I mean, it's the voice I hear the most. But I want to encourage you because you and Kelby, your husband, Kelby, have both known my struggles and what I've been walking through. And even in yours, you both have sent me text messages asking how I'm doing. Your husband just 2 days ago sends me a message and says to me, first off, how are you doing? Like, is things good? Is it bad? And, I just love you guys because even in those times, even in those seasons where you feel like you might, you could lean heavily on your own thoughts, your own struggles, you think of other people. And Katelyn, I know that about you and believe that about you. I've seen it numerous times, not just in my life, but in other people's lives. And so, I want to speak some courage into your life because you're doing awesome. And even in that time where it feels like, man, I'm not a good Christian or whatever, you lead so well, more than you probably realize, in the impact you have and how you encourage and how you love. And that's awesome. And I just want you to know how amazing you guys are. So
Thank you.
that being
Thank
said,
you.
all right, let's go. Let's try to lean a little more on the positive side now. So what would you say has been your biggest strength in the last year? Where have you seen, these things rise up in a good way? What's your biggest strength?
I think the word that comes to mind is perseverance for me, because I really just haven't, myself and Kelby, he's always encouraging me, like, we've been through this. We're going to get through this. Like, it's going to be okay. It's not like a Kentucky hashtag, like, we're in this together type thing.
Right.
Through COVID. But I think just learning to be okay with a subpar perseverance in my head. Like, to me, I'm like, I want to fix it and just be done and be like, okay, yeah, all right, I'm better. But I can persevere in the crappy times too, like,
Sure.
I think it's finding a balance. I want to know, I've always wondered, I'm like, where's this perfect line between like discipline and grace? Like, and I don't think there is. So I'm trying to train my brain to realize that, there's times when I might feel, quote unquote, feel the same. And there are times when in my heart of hearts, like, I know that I just need to stop whatever commitment I have, break the commitment and be like, no, I'm going to go sit in a bathtub, or I'm going to go just chill, like lay in my bed, take a nap, something like that. And then there's other times where I might feel that same anxiety or whatever it is, but I know, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to work, or I'm going to get up and work out or call a friend or do something and push through it. So I think it's kind of finding that balance. And I've just had to do that through learning to push myself. Because the other option is to give up and be like, well, I've been plagued with this crappy situation and this thing that is constantly affecting my brain, and I'm just going to kind of give up. And to me, that's just not an option. So I think just working to get stronger every time I have to go through one of these lulls or deal with this fog. And then another thing, I guess, that I feel like I've gotten better at this past year is learning to accept help and say thank you. I've had so many people who have reached out and offered to do something or showed up to my house and brought me a meal. And like normal me, I just don't like that because I would prefer to help somebody else.
Sure.
But learning to say like, no, this is a gift from God, accept help and say thank you and show my gratitude.
That's a hard thing to do, isn't it? Like I'm finding that in my own life. This is hard to accept help and to, I think there's something maybe like a pride thing. And like you were saying, like mom and you, just the nature of it feels like we feel like it's wrong if we're on the receiving end of help. Yeah. But there's something about on the giving end of help that feels great. But it almost makes me challenge us to accept help more. Like, cause I think it almost seems like you would be weak. People would view you as weak if you don't accept help, but actually help is how we're supposed to live. We're supposed to help one another. It's okay for someone to carry burdens for you. That's, the Bible talks about that. I don't know. That struck me when you said that. It struck me differently than I usually, like in a good way. Like, man, we need a t-shirt that says accept help on it. You know what I mean? Like, or a tattoo. That's a little permanent, but you know what I'm saying?
I've heard someone say that, but I can't remember like where I've heard that, and I've shared it with other people, but like the importance of just accepting the help, like just say, okay.
Yeah.
And say thank you. Because like, if you think about when you do something kind for someone else, like if you're taking someone a meal or like, you don't think anything poorly, like, oh God, I can't believe this person's going to let me bring them a meal. Like,
right.
I never think that. I think, wow, like this is such a great opportunity to support this person. And all I want is for them to enjoy what I'm bringing them. And if they're grateful, that's cool too. But that's not what I'm doing.
Absolutely. I get that. Yeah. It's the cherry on top. Well, and what you're saying is great because I think it is like it's a practical application for when we're caught in our own heads. I feel like I am better. I can pull myself out of those moments a little better when I think about somebody else and when I go do something for somebody else, or I go reach out to someone else. It like just takes your mind off yourself and what you think about yourself, and you start thinking about somebody else in a good way. So I think what you're saying is awesome. I want us to answer this question. Do you think anxiety and depression are curable illnesses? In your own opinion, obviously we are not researchers of this, but just in your own opinion, do you think they're curable illnesses?
Really? I would like to say yes.
Right.
So badly. I would like to say yes, but I'm constantly kind of coming to that realization that most likely this side of heaven, I am not going to be cured of these anxious thoughts, this struggle with depression. I definitely think it's treatable. I think there are things that I can help, but it's not this really cute like Band-Aid that I would like in my head to like
absolutely
do this one thing, take this medication, do this. I've learned that there's a combination of things that I can do. There are things that work fantastic at some points of my life. And other times I can repeat the same thing.
Right.
And I'm still in the funk. And I can't. So, there are things that I have done that in a moment have helped me. But ultimately, no, I think I am I've gone through this process of grieving that too. Because it's a loss of something that I, have in my head, this picture of how I want to be as a person, what I want my character to be like, how I want to interact with people on a daily basis. And at some points, yes, I can be that person that I want to be, but completely out of my control. There are other times where I can't, like, it's whatever this struggle that I'm going through, these ups and downs that I experience, what might work at one moment doesn't always work. So it's realizing that I just have to keep fighting.
I I asked that question, and you know this, but I asked that question because I think there's so many self-help books out there. There's so many podcasts. There's so many, you even mentioned, you listen and you read and all that. There's so many of those things, and they all have different angles. They all have different approaches. And I believe that they're a tremendous help to this. Even this podcast is one of those examples. Like, it's a great help. It's a great resource, but it isn't a fix. It isn't a fix all. And I believe that's because we're on this side of heaven as well. I believe it's because, like, there's still sin in the world, which means there's still insecurity in the world, which means there's still perfectionism in the world, all those things. And because of that, we're still going to deal with it in seasons. And it really determines, and what you've said a couple times, is literally the whole purpose behind this podcast. Let's Get Tryin is like, you just got to keep doing it. You got to keep moving. Perseverance is huge. You talked about you're going to keep traveling, but you're going to have that heavy backpack on. Like, those are big things, and we all want freedom. We want peace, but unfortunately that's what we were meant for, but that's not what we're at right now. And so I'm with you. I answer that as, I would love for it to be a yes. It is a curable illness. Anxiety and depression is a curable illness, but I think this side of heaven, no. But what's important is that we keep moving, keep thriving, keep pressing on. And that's what is important. So I love what you're saying there, because it's just hard for anyone to accept that it's not a curable thing. It's not like you take a pill and it's done. But it is a reality that we're always going to walk through it. So, all right. So last question for you. How do you plan to move forward? What's going to keep you going? What's going to help you push through with perseverance, through this struggle, this ongoing thing like we're talking about?
I think, for me, it's persevering. I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue to persevere. I'm going to share with others. I think that is something that brings me purpose. I don't thankfully I'm at a point where I don't have to slap like a happy face sticker on my face and be like, I'm good, all's great. Like, I'm going to share with other people, because I know that other people, in my head, in my mind, my thoughts are telling me everyone else is like peachy keen and like no one's struggling. But in my heart, I know that other people are struggling. And, because I've seen that through sharing with someone, I might be vulnerable and be like, this is what I just think about. I say this a lot at work. I'm like, I think blah, blah, blah about myself. And everyone's like, well, I think the same thing about myself. And I'm like, well, why aren't you guys like freaking out like me? They're like, well, I just don't ever say it. I'm like, well, dang.
Right.
But it's freeing to kind of share that and embrace the fact that like we're all struggling together, but we can continue to encourage one another. Like, there is just nothing like knowing somebody has been through what you are going through or what you've been through, because it kind of gives you that sense of camaraderie. Like, shoot, like, okay, they made it through. They didn't like die in the process. And just knowing, sharing, I think just continuing to seek out wisdom from God, from peers that have been through it. Like, a lot of times when I'm struggling, I'll reach out to you like, help, I'm freaking out. Through continuing to like study God's word and realize that he has a purpose for my life, basically. And it's not just to struggle with anxiety and depression and live a crappy life, like there's purpose in it. And so, yeah, I think just continuing to trust, to share with other people, to create this community that he created me for, and to continue persevering while I'm working continually, because I can't find the magic fix to cure it. I'm going to just keep fighting and keep trying new things to help myself break free of these thoughts that I'm letting myself become captive to. I'm should break free of this struggle, and continue to give myself grace in the times when I can't break free, in the times when it is too overwhelming, and keep pushing. I don't know. I wish I told you before all this. I was like, I don't have anything life-changing to say. I haven't figured it out yet. I don't want to talk to you and share it with the world until I figure out the perfect answer. And basically, I don't think there is an answer. And
Exactly.
so I think let's just keep loving each other and encouraging one another, because we're all fighting battles, whether or not we're talking about it on a podcast or secretly thinking these thoughts in bed at night and frustrated with ourselves. Like, don't let yourself get stuck in that disappointment with yourself, keep reaching out and trying to, find purpose, to get help.
Well, again, you have life-changing things to say. Like, I hope you know that. Like, you there's a ton of gold in what you've said over the course of the 40 minutes we've been talking. Like,
because I've said a lot. If you just say,
that's all right. That's all right. You're a talker. I'm okay with that. No, seriously. Like, I believe that you have so much to give. And I believe that about all of God's people. Like, I think it's a lot of times we forget our identity in Christ, and we forget that what we have been given is a blessing, and actually we can use all things, even the bad, to help somebody. And I know that right now. Like, I fully believe that I do this podcast because I struggle, and I don't want people to feel like they struggle alone, and we both know that it's easy to do that. Like you said, just lay in your bed at night and think all these things about yourself, and then believe, like your coworkers, oh, well, I wasn't going to say anything about that, but I struggle too. And man, like, think about all the people you interact with in a day, and how many of them think this stuff, but they never ever say it. So, you're leading out, and what you've said is so good and such a good challenge for all of us. So, Katelyn, I adore your family. I'm so grateful for our friendship, so grateful for your honesty. That's what I love about you. You're not going to hide behind it. You're just going to lay it out there. And I love that so much, because the world needs more of it. So I appreciate you so much being on this episode again. I'm going to have you back again at some point, because I love our conversations, and I think they're rich, and they hopefully will be an encouragement to someone else. So, Katelyn, thanks for being on here.
Thank you, Aaron.
I love that conversation with Katelyn, and here's why: because she's very real. She's very honest. She's not afraid to talk about her struggles, and we all need to work on that in our lives. I know that we feel like, oh, if I expose this, if I tell people about this, then people are going to judge me, or people are going to think differently about me. But here's the thing: that's what the enemy wants you to think. And I love how she's setting that example, that it's okay to talk about our struggles. So find someone you trust. Go talk to them about what you're struggling with, because like we've established in this episode, we all have a fight. We all have something that we're dealing with. And you know what? A lot of times we feel alone because the enemy wants us to stay alone. So let's work against that. All right. So if you wouldn't mind, hey, go find Katelyn Tabb on Facebook. If you can, just encourage her and appreciate her for being on this episode. I really, really love her wisdom. She's like a Yoda. Yeah, she's definitely like Yoda. Anyway, all right. As we're closing out, as always, please hit the subscribe button. Please share this and also rate it and leave a comment and all that good jazz, because it helps me out. It helps get the word out. And again, it's not about a podcast, but it's about a lifestyle of living real, being authentic. So let's get trying.